For 30 years, Eleanor believed her parents' death was an accident and her aunt's hatred a curse she'd never escape. But death has a strange way of settling old debts. When her aunt's final will names her sole heir, it drags her back to the decaying estate of her childhood. There, hidden among dusty papers and unread letters, waits a truth so devastating it shatters her understanding of love, guilt, and what it means to survive family. The inheritance isn't money, it's a reckoning. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for spending your time with me today. Wherever you're listening from, I'd love to know, what city or country are you tuning in from? Today's story is one of silence, guilt, and a truth buried for decades. It's called The Inheritance Clause, the story of a woman who thought she'd been cursed by her aunt, only to discover she'd been protected all along. The envelope arrived on a Thursday, slipped under my apartment door like a threat. I didn't recognize the law firm's name embossed in gold across the top, Holloway and Associates, Estate Attorneys, Vancouver. My hands trembled as I sliced it open with a butter knife, standing in my cramped kitchen while October rain hammered against the window. The radiator clanked and hissed, doing nothing to fight the cold that seeped through the walls of my basement apartment. Water dripped from a ceiling stain in the corner, the same leak my landlord had ignored for 3 months. Dear Ms. Eleanor Voss, we regret to inform you of the passing of your aunt, Margot Voss, on September 14th. As her sole living relative, you are named primary beneficiary in her will. Please contact our office immediately to discuss the estate settlement. I dropped into a chair, the letter fluttering to the stained linoleum floor. Aunt Margot. Dead. I stared at the words until they blurred into meaningless shapes. I hadn't spoken to her in 12 years. Not since she threw me out at 17, screaming that I was poison and just like your mother. The memory was crystal clear, her face twisted with rage, veins bulging in her neck, spit flying from her lips as she hurled my garbage bag of belongings onto the porch in the middle of a rainstorm. I'd spent my entire childhood in her care after my parents died in a ferry accident when I was 6, and every single day she reminded me I was a burden she never asked for. Every meal eaten in silence. Every birthday without celebration. Every night I cried myself to sleep in that cold house, wondering what I'd done wrong. Now she was gone. And apparently, she'd left me something. The cynic in me, the part shaped by 17 years of emotional abuse, wondered what kind of final cruelty this would be. Margot didn't do kindness. She didn't do gifts without strings attached. She did punishment disguised as duty, obligation wrapped in contempt. I picked up the letter and read it again, searching for hidden meaning between the formal legal phrases. My phone buzzed with a text from my roommate asking about rent. I was 3 weeks late, working double shifts at the diner and still coming up short, but I couldn't focus on that now. My hands were shaking too badly to type a response. Outside, the rain turned to hail, pinging against the glass like tiny stones thrown by an angry child. I made coffee with trembling hands, the cheap instant kind that tasted like burnt dirt, and sat at my tiny kitchen table. The fluorescent light overhead flickered and buzzed. I thought about Margot's house, the one I'd sworn never to return to. I thought about her cold gray eyes watching me over the dinner table, the way she'd correct my posture, my speech, my very existence with the same tone someone might use to train a disobedient dog. And now she was offering me something from beyond the grave. I knew it wouldn't be simple. Nothing with Margot ever was. The law office sat on the 32nd floor of a glass tower downtown, the kind of building I'd only ever entered to clean offices after hours during my college years before I dropped out. The elevator was mirrored, and I avoided looking at myself, the thrift store blazer with the broken button, the slacks that didn't quite fit, the dark circles under my eyes from too many double shifts and not enough sleep. The receptionist was young, blonde, immaculately dressed. She looked at me like I'd tracked mud across her polished marble floor before waving me toward a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the harbor. Ships moved through gray water under gray sky. Inside, a man with silver hair and tired eyes stood to greet me. His suit was expensive, his watch more so, the kind of watch that cost what I made in 6 months. Ms. Voss. I'm Gerald Holloway. Thank you for coming on such short notice. His handshake was firm but brief, the kind of touch that assessed and dismissed you in seconds. Professional. Distant. Please, sit. I lowered myself into a leather chair that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. The room smelled of old books and furniture polish and money, that specific scent wealthy spaces have, like success has an odor. I'll be direct, Holloway said, sliding a thick folder across the polished mahogany table. His movements were precise, practiced. Your aunt's estate is substantial. The house in North Vancouver, investment portfolios, savings accounts, several commercial properties I wasn't aware she owned, total value approximately $3.2 million. The number didn't feel real. It hung in the air like smoke, something I could see but couldn't quite grasp. $3 million. I'd never even seen $1,000 in one place. I'd spent the last 12 years scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck, one emergency away from homelessness. However, he continued, his expression darkening, and I felt my stomach drop before he even finished the sentence, there are conditions. Very specific, very unusual conditions. Of course there were conditions. Margot never gave anything without extracting payment, without making sure you knew the cost. What kind of conditions? He opened the folder and pulled out a handwritten letter, the paper thick and expensive, the kind Margot always used for her correspondence. I recognized her angular script immediately, sharp, precise, unforgiving. Every letter perfectly formed, no wasted ink, no softness anywhere. Your aunt wrote this 3 months before she died. She was very clear that I was to read it to you verbatim, in person, with no one else present. He adjusted his reading glasses and cleared his throat. Eleanor, if you're hearing this, I'm gone. Good. I won't have to see your face when you learn the truth. The money is yours, but only if you can prove you deserve it. I've hidden something in the house, evidence of what really happened the night your parents died. Find it within 30 days of my death, or the entire estate goes to charity. You have 3 weeks left. The clock is ticking. Don't disappoint me again. You always were such a disappointment. Signed, Margot Voss. I couldn't breathe. The room tilted sideways. I gripped the armrests of the chair, knuckles white, fingernails digging into the leather. My heart hammered against my ribs. What does she mean? What really happened? My voice cracked, barely above a whisper. My parents drowned. The ferry accident in 1998. Everyone knows that. It was investigated. Case closed. Holloway folded his hands on the table, studying me with something that might have been pity. His eyes were kind, which somehow made it worse. I'm only the messenger, Ms. Voss. But I should tell you, your aunt became increasingly paranoid in her final months. She had the house locked down like a fortress, security cameras installed everywhere, motion sensors on every door and window. She called me at odd hours, sometimes in the middle of the night, talking about protecting secrets, about debts that needed to be paid before she died. He paused, choosing his words carefully. She told me once, during a particularly late call, that she was safeguarding a truth that could ruin everything. I asked her what she meant. She hung up on me. Ruin what? She had no one. No friends, no family except me, and she threw me away like garbage. I don't know, he admitted. I don't know if this is a genuine revelation or the paranoid delusion of a dying woman facing mortality and judgment. But legally, the terms of the will are binding. I've been instructed to enforce them to the letter. I stared at the letter, my aunt's words blurring through sudden tears I refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of this stranger in his expensive suit. So I have to search her house? For what? She doesn't even say what I'm looking for. This could be anything. A photograph. A document. A dying woman's fantasy. That's unclear. She mentioned evidence multiple times in our conversations but never specified what form it would take. Whatever it is, finding it triggers the inheritance. Failing to find it within the time limit means you get nothing. The estate will be liquidated and donated to several charities she's named. He pulled out another envelope. This is the key to the house and the security codes. The utilities are still on. I've been maintaining the property pending resolution of the estate. I took the envelope, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. Ms. Voss, Holloway added as I stood to leave, his voice gentler now, whatever you find in that house, consider carefully what you do with it. Some truths, once uncovered, can't be buried again. And some truths hurt more than lies ever could. I nodded mutely and walked out, my legs feeling like water. The house hadn't changed. It sat at the end of a winding road lined with towering cedars that blocked out most of the light even at midday. Victorian architecture, dark blue paint peeling at the corners, gingerbread trim rotting in places, windows like empty eyes staring down at me with what felt like malice. The yard was overgrown, blackberry vines creeping up the porch railings, dead leaves piled in drifts against the foundation. I'd run from this place the moment I turned 18 with nothing but a backpack and $200 stolen from Margot's purse, and I swore I'd never return. Now I stood at the front door with Holloway's key in my hand, my breath fogging in the October cold. The wind carried the smell of wet leaves and something else of decay, maybe, or just the scent of abandonment. A crow cawed from somewhere in the trees, harsh and mocking. The lock turned with a heavy click that echoed inside. The door swung open with a creak straight out of a horror movie, and I half expected to see Margot standing there, gray hair pulled back in her severe bun, lips pressed into that thin line of perpetual disapproval. But the hallway was empty. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old lavender and something medicinal underneath, the smell of sickness and death. Everything was exactly as I remembered. The grandfather clock in the hallway stopped at 3:17, the Persian rug worn thin in the center where Margot had paced for decades, the oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors I'd never met lining the walls. They seemed to watch me as I walked past, judging me the way Margot always had. The wallpaper was the same faded burgundy, water-stained in places. Margot had lived here alone for over 40 years after my grandfather died when I was a baby, and the house felt like a mausoleum built for the living. I started in the study, the room where Margot had spent most of her time. Shelves lined every wall from floor to ceiling, crammed with leather-bound books and yellowed files and document boxes labeled in her precise handwriting. Property records. Tax documents. Investment portfolios. I pulled them down one by one, shaking out pages, checking for hidden compartments, running my hands along the backs of shelves for false panels. Dust made me sneeze. A spider crawled across my hand and I nearly screamed. Nothing. I searched the massive oak desk, prying open drawers, examining the underside for taped envelopes or hidden switches. I pulled up the edges of the Persian rug, my fingernails breaking as I checked for loose floorboards. I examined every painting for safes hidden behind them, lifting frames off the walls and leaving pale rectangles on the faded wallpaper. Hours passed. My hands were filthy, my back aching, my throat dry from the dust. The grandfather clock ticked. I didn't remember starting it, but it was running now, each tick echoing through the silent house like a countdown. In the kitchen, I found old grocery receipts rubber-banded together, expired medications lined up in the cupboard like soldiers, a calendar with doctor appointments circled in red marker. Margot had been sick for months, oncology appointments, radiation schedules, hospice visits at the end. Cancer, probably, based on the medication names I recognized from volunteering at a nursing home years ago. She'd faced it alone, just like she did everything else. No friends. No visitors. Just her and her secrets in this decaying house, dying slowly, in pain, keeping whatever truth she'd buried for 26 years. Part of me wondered if she'd died angry. If she'd spent her last moments thinking about me, about the inheritance, about whether I'd come crawling back to find whatever twisted gift she'd left. The second floor was worse. Her bedroom was untouched, bed made with military precision, hospital corners tight enough to bounce a coin off, pillows arranged exactly so. The closet was full of dark dresses, all identical, all severe, smelling of mothballs and that lavender scent she always wore. The jewelry box held nothing valuable, just costume pieces and a single photograph of my grandparents on their wedding day, faces frozen in sepia-toned unhappiness. They looked like they were attending a funeral, not a wedding. I moved through the guest rooms, each one furnished but clearly unused for decades, dust thick on every surface. The bathroom still had Margot's prescriptions lined up by the sink, painkillers, anti-nausea medication, sleeping pills. Strong ones. I checked behind the toilet tank, inside the medicine cabinet, even unscrewed the shower drain with a butter knife, gagging at the smell. Nothing. A storage closet packed with Christmas decorations that hadn't seen daylight in decades revealed nothing but moths and the smell of mothballs and crushed dreams. Ornaments with names I didn't recognize. A child's stocking with Daniel embroidered on it, my father's, from before I was born, before everything went wrong. I sank onto the hallway floor, exhausted and furious. My watch showed 7 p.m. I'd been searching for 6 hours straight without food or water. My head pounded. My hands were scraped and bleeding from prying at floorboards and drawer tracks. This was a game. Another way for Margot to torture me from beyond the grave. She'd dangled the money and the truth like bait, knowing I'd come crawling back to this house I hated, knowing I'd tear it apart looking for something that probably didn't even exist. Maybe the cruelty was the point. Maybe there was no evidence, no truth, just a dying woman's final chance to make me suffer. Then I heard it. A faint creak from above. The third floor. The attic. My blood went cold. I'd only been up there once as a child, maybe 8 years old. I'd been exploring, curious about the locked door at the top of the narrow staircase. I'd found the key in Margot's bedroom and snuck up there while she was in town shopping. The attic had been full of boxes and old furniture and things that smelled like age and secrets. I'd been looking through a trunk of old photographs, my parents as children, my father smiling in a way I'd never seen in any other picture, when Margot had come home early. She'd caught me there, standing in the middle of the attic with photos spread around me, and her face had gone white. Not red with anger, white, like she'd seen a ghost. She'd slapped me so hard across the face that my ear rang for days and I saw stars. She dragged me down the stairs by my arm, fingers bruising my skin, and locked me in my bedroom for 2 days with only water and stale bread slipped under the door. She'd forbidden me from ever going back, her face inches from mine, breath hot and sour. If I ever catch you up there again, I'll send you away. Do you understand me? I will send you somewhere you'll never come back from. I'd been too scared to disobey. But I wasn't 8 anymore. And Margot was dead. Now, I climbed the narrow stairs, each step groaning under my weight like a warning. The stairwell was dark, no windows, and I had to feel my way up using the walls. Cobwebs brushed my face. Something skittered away in the darkness, as mouse, probably. The attic door was locked, but the key hung on a hook nearby, almost too easy, too obvious. Like she wanted me to find it. Like this was all part of the plan. My hand hesitated on the doorknob. What if there was nothing up there? What if this was just another empty room, another wild goose chase, another way for Margot to prove I was as worthless as she'd always said? What if there was something worse than nothing? I turned the key. The door swung open into darkness. I fumbled for a light switch, found a pull chain hanging from the ceiling, and yanked it. A single bare bulb flickered to life, casting weak yellow light across the space. The attic was smaller than I remembered, with a single dusty window and stacks of cardboard boxes piled haphazardly. Water stains marked the ceiling in places where rain had leaked through over the years. The floorboards were warped with age, creaking even when I stood still. Most of the boxes held junk, old tax returns going back 40 years, broken furniture, moth-eaten clothes that probably belonged to my grandparents. But in the far corner, half hidden under a paint-stained tarp, I found something different. A metal filing cabinet. Industrial gray. 4 drawers. Heavy duty, the kind you'd see in a government office or a law firm. Locked. I searched for a key, checking boxes, running my hands along the rafters, even checking inside an old trunk filled with musty blankets and a wedding dress that had yellowed with age. Nothing. I went back downstairs, found a screwdriver and a hammer in the kitchen junk drawer, and returned to the attic. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The metal was old, cheap. It only took 10 minutes of prying and leverage before the top drawer bent enough to slide free with a screech that made me wince. Inside were files. Dozens of them, organized with tabs written in Margot's handwriting. I pulled out the first one, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The label read, Voss Ferry Incident, 1998. My heart stopped. Everything stopped. Inside were newspaper clippings, police reports, photographs, witness statements. I spread them across the dusty floor, my hands shaking, breath coming in short gasps that sounded too loud in the silent attic. The official story was simple, the one I'd been told my entire life. My parents, Daniel and Claire Voss, had taken the evening ferry from Vancouver Island back to the mainland on March 3, 1998. They'd been visiting my mother's sister, trying to work out family problems. Somewhere mid-crossing, they'd gone overboard. A tragic accident in rough seas. Their bodies were found 2 days later, washed up on different beaches miles apart. Accidental drowning. Case closed. Move on. But these documents told a different story. There was a witness statement I'd never seen before, a deckhand named Marcus Cho who reported seeing a heated argument between my parents and another passenger minutes before they disappeared. He'd been interviewed by police but his statement had been marked insufficient evidence and filed away. The passenger's name was redacted, blacked out with heavy marker, but Cho's description was detailed, older woman, maybe 50s, gray hair, expensive dark coat. She was yelling, aggressive. The younger woman, the victim, was crying, looked scared. The man was trying to calm them both down. There was a toxicology report showing my mother had alcohol and prescription sedatives in her system. Not just present, lethal levels. High enough that she shouldn't have been conscious, much less walking around on a ferry deck in rough seas. There was a photograph of the ferry deck, taken by a tourist who'd been interviewed but never called to testify. In the background, barely visible through evening fog, 3 figures stood near the railing. One of them was clearly my mother, recognizable even in the grainy image by the red coat she always wore, the one I'd found in a box years later and held crying because it still smelled like her perfume. One was my father in his brown jacket. The other? I held the photo closer to the bare bulb, squinting. The other person was Margot. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. The room tilted. I thought I might pass out. I dug deeper into the file, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn pages. More photos. More witness statements that had been buried or ignored or paid off. A police report that mentioned discrepancies in witness accounts but recommended closing the case anyway due to lack of physical evidence and clear accident determination. A note in the margin in handwriting I didn't recognize. Family requests quick resolution. Family. Margot. And then, at the very bottom, a handwritten letter on Margot's personal stationery, the same thick cream-colored paper she'd used for everything important. To whom it may concern. I write this confession in the event that the truth ever surfaces, though I pray it never does. I am an old woman now, dying, and I find I cannot take this secret to my grave without at least recording what happened. Let God and Eleanor judge me as they will. Yes, I was on the ferry that night. Yes, I argued with my brother Daniel and his wife Claire. This much is documented, though I paid substantial sums to ensure those documents stayed buried and the investigation was closed quickly. Claire was unstable, severely mentally ill, suicidal, addicted to pills prescribed by doctors who should have known better, drowning in debt from medical bills and treatment programs that never worked. Daniel refused to commit her to a psychiatric facility. He was weak. He always had been, even as children. He'd rather watch her destroy herself and take Eleanor down with her than make the hard choice. I went to the ferry that night to force the issue. I'd arranged to meet them, told Daniel I wanted to help, that I'd found a facility that could treat Claire properly. It was a lie. I wanted to force him to choose his wife or his daughter. Make him see that Claire was going to kill herself eventually, and she might take Eleanor with her. Claire was in one of her episodes when they arrived, drunk and high on sedatives, crying and screaming about how she'd ruined everyone's lives, how Eleanor would be better off without her, how we'd all be better off if she was dead. Daniel was exhausted, at his wits' end, barely holding himself together. When Claire stumbled to the railing, sobbing hysterically about throwing herself over, about ending it all, I made a choice. I didn't push her. I swear I didn't touch her. But I didn't stop her either. I watched her climb up onto the lower rail, watched her lean out over the black water, and I did nothing. Daniel lunged after her, tried to pull her back. They both went over together. She fell and he jumped. Or they both fell. In the chaos, I couldn't tell. The water was black and freezing. The ferry was moving fast. They disappeared almost immediately. I could have screamed sooner. I could have alerted the crew immediately. I didn't. I waited. I stood there and counted to 60 while the ferry moved further away from where they fell. Then I calmly walked to the nearest crew member and reported that I'd seen 2 people fall overboard. By the time they turned the ferry around and called the Coast Guard, it was too late. The water was too cold, the current too strong, the distance too great. They were gone. I let them die because Eleanor deserved better. She deserved a stable home, proper education, discipline and structure. Her parents couldn't provide that. They were drowning themselves and pulling her under with them. I took her in. I raised her. I gave her everything she needed to survive in this world. And yes, I was hard on her. I had to be. She had too much of her mother in her, that weakness, that emotion, that tendency towards self-destruction. I had to beat it out of her before it consumed her the way it consumed Claire. If Eleanor ever finds this letter, she'll understand that sometimes cruelty is mercy. Sometimes love means letting go, even if it looks like murder to those who lack the courage to make impossible choices. I did what had to be done. And I have no regrets. Margot Voss, November 2023. I read it once. Twice. 3 times. The words didn't change. Then I crawled to the corner of the attic and vomited until there was nothing left but bile and the sound of my own sobbing. I don't know how long I sat there on that filthy attic floor, surrounded by the evidence of my aunt's betrayal. Hours, maybe. Long enough that my legs went numb. Long enough that the light through the small window faded from gray afternoon to dusk to full dark. The bare bulb swayed slightly in the draft, making shadows dance across the sloped ceiling like demons. Margot hadn't just hidden the truth. She'd engineered it. She'd stood on that ferry deck and watched my parents drown, counted to 60 while they died in freezing water, while my father tried desperately to save my mother and failed. She'd lied to investigators, paid them off probably, ensured the case was closed quickly and quietly with no uncomfortable questions. She'd taken me in not out of love but out of some twisted sense of duty or maybe guilt she couldn't quite silence. And then she'd spent 17 years punishing me for it. Called me poison. Treated me like a burden. Told me I was just like my mother, broken, wrong, weak, destined to ruin everything I touched. She'd hit me, locked me in my room, denied me food when I misbehaved. She'd thrown me out the moment I started asking questions about my parents, about why we never visited their graves, about why she flinched whenever I laughed too loud or cried too hard. Because she couldn't stand looking at the child she'd orphaned. Every time she saw me, she saw that night. The ferry. The black water. The choice she made to stand still and do nothing. She'd raised me on guilt she'd created, punished me for surviving, and then left me this letter as a final twisted gift. The truth she knew would destroy me. Or maybe, and this thought was somehow worse, maybe she thought I'd understand. Maybe in her warped, dying mind, she thought I'd see it her way. That she'd done me a favor, saved me from a mentally ill mother and weak father. That I'd thank her for the sacrifice. Maybe she thought this letter was absolution. I called Holloway from the attic floor, my voice hollow and distant like it belonged to someone else speaking from very far away. I found it. The evidence? His voice was careful, gentle. Yes. There was a long pause. And? What does it say? My aunt confessed to letting my parents die. She watched them drown and did nothing. She stood there and counted to 60 before calling for help. She let them die on purpose. Silence on the other end. Then, quietly, Ms. Voss, I don't even have words. This is. Do you want me to contact the authorities? Reopen the case? I stared at the letter in my lap, Margot's precise handwriting blurring in the dim light. No. No. But this is evidence of. The case is 26 years old. Everyone involved is dead except me. What's the point? Who gets punished? Who gets justice? My parents are gone. Margot's gone. There's no one left to hold accountable. Holloway exhaled slowly. Then. I'll process the inheritance. Given that you've fulfilled the terms of the will by locating the evidence, the funds will be transferred to your account within the week. I'll need you to come sign some additional paperwork, but the estate is yours. Thank you. Ms. Voss, Eleanor, if you need anything at all, counseling, legal advice. I just need this to be over. I hung up and sat in the darkness, the letter still in my hands. A week later, I stood in the same lawyer's office, signing paperwork that made me a millionaire. Holloway slid a cashier's check across the desk. The amount was printed in neat black numbers, $3,247,000, after taxes and legal fees. Congratulations, Ms. Voss. Or perhaps condolences. I'm not sure which is more appropriate given the circumstances. I folded the check carefully and tucked it into my purse next to the letter I'd brought with me, Margot's confession, sealed in a plastic bag like evidence. Mr. Holloway, can I ask you something? Of course. Did my aunt seem guilty? In her final months? Did she show any remorse at all? He considered this carefully, removing his glasses and cleaning them with a cloth from his pocket, stalling, maybe, trying to find the right words. Guilt isn't quite the word I'd use. Haunted, maybe. She talked often about debts that needed to be paid, about accounts that had to be settled before she died. She was meticulous about her end-of-life planning, insisted every detail be perfect. She called me 17 times in her last month alone, always asking if the will was exactly as she'd specified, if I'd destroy it if you didn't find the evidence, if the charities were properly named. He paused. I think she knew she was dying and wanted to finish things. Close the books. Make sure her story was told, even if only to you. By tormenting me one last time. Or by giving you the truth. In her own twisted way. Maybe it was both. Maybe to her, they were the same thing. I stood to leave, then paused at the door. My hand was on the handle when I turned back. I'm selling the house. I never want to see it again. I want it demolished if possible. I understand. I can recommend an estate sale company to handle the contents and a realtor who specializes in difficult properties. Please do that. At the door, I turned back one more time. For what it's worth, Mr. Holloway, I don't think she loved me. But I think she hated herself more. I think that letter was as much confession as it was explanation. I think she wanted me to know, at the end, that she knew what she'd done was wrong. That she couldn't die with it locked inside her. Holloway nodded slowly. That might be the closest thing to peace either of you will find, Ms. Voss. I hope you find more than that. You deserve it. I donated half the inheritance, $1.6 million, to a foundation for orphan children, specifically the kind of charity that helps kids who've lost parents to suicide, addiction, mental illness. The kind of kids who get lost in the system or taken in by relatives who don't really want them. The rest, I kept. I moved to a new city in Montreal, where winter is honest about being brutal and no one knew my name or my history or the house at the end of the cedar-lined road. I started over. Got my GED, then a degree in social work. Built a life that didn't revolve around survival or anger or trying to understand why I wasn't enough to save. I work with foster kids now. The difficult ones, the ones everyone else has given up on. The ones who act out because they're terrified and angry and don't know how to process trauma. I see myself in every single one of them. But some nights, I still dream of the attic. The filing cabinet. The letter in my aunt's handwriting. The photograph of 3 figures on a ferry deck disappearing into darkness. Sometimes cruelty is mercy. I've spent years trying to decide if she was a monster or a broken woman who made an impossible choice. If she was a murderer or someone who simply failed to act in a moment of crisis. If she ruined my life or saved it from something potentially worse. Maybe she was both. Maybe we all are, in the end, capable of terrible things when we convince ourselves it's for the greater good. Capable of loving and destroying in the same breath. Capable of carrying guilt so heavy it warps everything around it, including the people we're supposed to protect. I burned the letter 6 months after I found it. I couldn't let it exist in the world, couldn't risk someone else finding it and judging Margot even more harshly than I already had. Couldn't let it become evidence in a case that would go nowhere and help no one. Couldn't let it define me forever. I watched it curl and blacken in my fireplace, Margot's precise handwriting disappearing into ash, and I felt something inside me finally break loose. Because here's the truth I've never told anyone, the truth that keeps me awake some nights staring at the ceiling. Part of me understands why she did it. Not the cruelty afterward, not the punishment and emotional abuse. But that moment on the ferry? That impossible choice between action and inaction? Between a mentally ill woman who might have killed herself eventually anyway, and a child who needed stability? I understand it. And I hate that I understand it. My mother was sick, severely mentally ill, suicidal, addicted to medications that were probably making things worse. My father was drowning trying to save her, exhausted and desperate and out of options. If they'd lived, if Margot had saved them that night, what would my childhood have been? Watching my mother spiral further. Watching my father break under the weight. Living in poverty and chaos and hospitals, and maybe eventually becoming another casualty of their dysfunction. Margot gave me stability. Cold, cruel, painful stability, but stability nonetheless. Structure and discipline and a roof over my head and food every day and an education. She destroyed my family and then raised me in the ruins. And I hate her for it. But I also owe her everything I am. That's the inheritance she really left me, not the money, but the weight of understanding that people are complicated. That love and harm can coexist in the same person, the same action. That sometimes the person who saves you is also the person who broke you. That mercy and cruelty can wear the same face and you might spend your whole life trying to tell them apart. I carry that weight every day. I use the money to help kids like me, kids caught in impossible situations with parents who can't save them and relatives who have to make terrible choices. Kids who need someone to see them as more